What's up guys, JS2Sense here, and I'll bring you a little talking head PSA about some news that came out this morning. It's really important. If you've got an RTX 3090 and you're playing a certain game, you could actually cause physical damage and or death to your graphics card. So watch this video in its entirety. We'll talk about the situation that's happening, the perimeters of which it's happening within, and then some speculation as to why and how to stop it from happening. This one's important, so don't skip it. NZXT's build is a quick and easy way to get a new gaming computer, and right now they are proud to announce expansion and availability to Australia, the Netherlands, France, and Italy. Build a gaming PC on your budget using the built-in configurator and see exactly how your favorite games will perform. And all builds are backed by the BLD Peace of Mind warranty. To get started building your next gaming PC, visit the BLD link in the description below. All right, so I know the intro was a little vague. What we're talking about here is players with high-end graphics cards, specifically maybe 3080 Ti's and 3090s that are playing Amazon's new MMO, New World. I don't know anything about this game. I've never played it, so I have no information about that, but I do know it just left alpha and is now in beta, which means more players are playing it. But the problems we're gonna talk about here, apparently, or I should say allegedly, because I don't have any firsthand knowledge here, did happen in alpha and is being experienced widely now in beta, and it's costing people thousands of dollars. When you play New World, and Glad did a tweet on this. Glad is a Twitch streamer and a YouTuber. Admitted, I've never seen his content. I don't know who he is. I don't know him. I don't know his tech knowledge. I don't know his troubleshooting ability. I don't know his PC knowledge. So that's a complete unknown variable here. Apparently, when he was playing the game in alpha, or maybe, yeah, I guess it was alpha because we just went to beta yesterday. The game shut down on him, OCP type behavior, overcurrent protection, which is where a computer just shuts down. He turns it back on, everything's fine, goes into the game, he's playing again, and then the computer shuts down again, but this time the difference is he hears a physical audible pop inside of his tower. No longer can he get a graphics card to post, or that graphics card to post in his system. He also went online, as most people would, and said, here's what happened to my card, you know, this is really weird, and then a lot of people started saying, yeah, that happened to me too, and me. So what people started realizing is that users with RTX 3090s that were running New World from Amazon were experiencing these shutdowns and sometimes deaths of their graphics cards. Now, if you start looking at the empirical data, and the only empirical data we truly have at the moment is that they were playing the same game, running an RTX 3090. The most common card that appears to be affected here is the EVGA for the Win 3, which is the 3090 card. But WCCF Tech is reporting that if you go through like the users that have been commenting on their problems, other AIBs are also mentioned in there. So it's not exclusive to the EVGA card. But one thing to keep in mind is that EVGA, if you go and look at sales right now, just look, I hate to even say scalped, but scalped cards, look at eBay, look at Craigslist. The most common brand you're gonna see right now, especially with 3090s, is EVGA, because they have outsold any other AIB in the amount of 3090s they've actually got out in the wild. So it's gonna look like it's affecting a single card the most, but time will tell. The more cards that get reported, the more cards that come in for RMA, the users that report their problems are gonna hopefully list their hardware, and then you can start to see what the percentages are. And if those percentages line up to what the market share is, then there's some data there that you can cross-reference, and stats and nerdy stuff. So as much as I feel like people wanna be like, yeah, it's a problem with the 3090 for the Win 3 card, the fact that any other users have reported the same problem with other brands sort of puts that particular theory aside a little bit. First and foremost, if you're playing this game and you have an RTX 3090, you need to beware, because this is a problem that as you start to read through the users that have talked about this, because like I said, there is a Reddit thread. I kind of hate when people do a Reddit thread and then say, has anyone else had this problem? Because you'll find a good amount of people that will, with good intentions, will respond to particular threads and say, yeah, I've had that problem, and they'll be very detailed. I was playing this, here's the card I have, here's the power supply I have, here's what happened. And other people will be like, yeah, it happened to me too, MSI sucks. A lot of people will look at a thread like that as an opportunity just to like post on particular brands. So you really have to be good at sifting out the garbage that exists on Reddit versus people that are actually trying to get to the root cause of a problem. So be wary of that first of all. And anyone that goes up there and just posts without having any actual experience with the situation that's talking about, delete your accounts. The other thing that appears to be happening here is that in the game, people are noticing that the second you hit play, Like the launcher launches, like the executable. You may not have even made it into the splash screen yet. And we would notice this actually, if you guys followed our guide to have a little screen in your little tower there that shows you your power draw and your temperatures and fan speeds and all that, you'll notice that it instantly just, whoosh, the power draw goes up, the core clock goes up, the FPS goes to thousands of FPS, if you have a 3090 or a card like 3080. I have a feeling 3080 Ti's are gonna make their way on this list too, because they're only like 3% behind a 3090. And if the situation we're talking about here affects the 3090 for the reasons I think it does, we're gonna see 3080 Ti's on this list as well. But what you'll notice is that the card just turns itself to 11 immediately. The little splash screen logos, the menu system itself, it's all rendered. And it looks like the game itself, with the exception of maybe VSync being turned on in your control panel for the graphics card, not the title, but the control panel, so that it doesn't even try to go above that once you launch the title, is just allowing the card to go to astronomical FPS and load and demand on the card itself. If the menu itself doesn't have anything that says, engine cap at 200 FPS or something like that, I mean, why do you need 6,000 FPS in the menu? You don't, but this is just a theory. I'll explain why I'm not convinced that this theory necessarily holds water. If the FPS is going that high in the menu system, that's obviously gonna put your power limit at like maxed out. It's gonna put your power draw maxed out. It's gonna put max demand on your VRMs and your power delivery systems and the chokes and the capacitors. And half of your card is power delivery. The other half is memory and core, and then power for memory. So half your card at that point is just like literally just rowing as fast as it possibly can. Like it's literally falling apart levels of load. It's like the old Furmark app. When there was actually a PSA for a while that said, guys, don't use Furmark anymore. It can damage your card. Or how Prime 95 was known to be able to damage certain Intel CPUs because of the way that the processor was designed and the way that the logic of the app worked. The app isn't smart enough to know, hey, we're hurting you. It's just doing its thing, and then the computer's trying to keep up. So first and foremost, to protect yourself from that, if you're gonna play this game, turn on VSync. It sucks. Yes, I know to be locked to whatever your FPS is. You bought a 3090 because you want to see the stupid FPS numbers. Unless you want those stupid FPS numbers to turn into magic smoke in your tower, turn on VSync first and foremost. That's the first thing you could potentially do to protect yourself. But I have a bigger theory here as to why I believe this is happening, just based on the reports that I've already read. We've recently talked about, and I even talked about it on Twitter, and I didn't get into arguments with people, because I don't really argue with people on Twitter anymore, but people argued with me that running pigtails on your power plugs is fine. And I argue that if you've got an RTX 3090 or a 3080 Ti or anything that uses over 300 watts now, 3080 is 320 watts stock, 3080 Ti and 3090 are 350. You overclock those, or you just push the power limit, you're gonna see those go, like if you push the power limit to plus 15%, what's 320 plus 15% of that, right? So we're talking over 360 or 370 watts. 3090s are going to 400 plus watts. The PCI Express power spec for an 8-pin is 150 watts. If you've got a custom card, like a 3090 for the Win 3, or an MSI card, or an Asus Strix card, those have 3 power plugs. So if you are suddenly going to be using a daisy chain on one of those, and then a single plug on the other one, because you have 3, you already are taking one of those particular lines on an overclocked card and potentially pulling it past its spec. Now, does that mean your power supply is at fault? No. But it means that you're not giving it the most optimal power delivery here. Now, this is obviously not going to apply to something like a 3070 or a 3060 Ti or something like that if you use a pigtail. Those cards are such low power draw versus like these big boy cards that the situation I'm describing is almost going to be impossible to have. The other piece of information we're not seeing here, what CPU are they running? Are they overclocking their CPU? Is it a high core count CPU? If we start saying, okay, we got an 800 watt power supply, and we're sending 400 plus watts of it to our GPU, which guaranteed we'll be hitting that kind of wattage just because of the fact that we are dealing with that crazy load demand. And this is something we will be testing when we do our video. We'll have a watt meter hooked up to it so you can see, we click play on the game, here's the overall system power increase. And you have a big CPU in there, you've got RGB lights everywhere, you've got water cooling pumps or something maybe, although I don't know if water cooled cards are being affected the same as this, but that's neither here nor there. You're gonna find that you might start introducing ripple down your PCIe power lines into your graphics card. Now, what's gonna be responsible for balancing out that power is your VRMs and your chokes and your capacitors in your graphics card to get clean power delivered to the GPU. I do not believe GPU cores are dying. I believe capacitors or VRMs are dying in the cards that are actually physically popping. And I feel like the pop that we're hearing might even potentially be a choke. Now, it's also extremely rare for a title to create that much runaway FPS in a menu system while also having that much power draw. Because when you load something like Doom Eternal, yeah, you'll hear the coil whine go crazy, and if you have an FPS counter up, you'll see it go to like 2,000 or 3,000 FPS. This is not unique. We have seen plenty of titles in the menu system with VSync turned off just go to, and we always joked about it, like, hey, we got 7,000 FPS, woohoo, with a black screen. But that's because it's only rendering a 2D scene, and if you actually monitored your power usage on your GPU, you'd see it's very low. But if you have that level of FPS overrun, as well as 100% load on your graphics card, that puts a huge demand on the components themselves. The other thing is coil whine. Coil whine is when the actual coil or the choker itself becomes excited, if you will, and it vibrates. It vibrates under the load and the electricity going through it. I'm almost wondering here if with that much load, that much power draw, and that much FPS, if maybe the chokes themselves might be getting physically damaged by just the level of vibration that they're happening. Now that's super rare these days too, because most people are using solid chokes and solid capacitors these days where they're filled with the resin, that way they can't move. That's something they started doing to fight coil whine. But again, these are the things that are unknown until brands start getting these RMA cards back and start really investigating, like, okay, we've gotten, let's hope 100 cards don't come back, but let's say we got 100 cards back and all of them have the same physical damage, they can pinpoint on what's happening there. I don't necessarily buy the FPS in the menu as being the problem, because people specifically said, oh, the FPS is the problem. It's killing the card because it's too much FPS. That's not the problem. It's too much FPS while not having any limitation on the power draw, which means it has everything to do with the way the scene is being rendered. Remember, the chokes and the phases, they're responsible for balancing out the power before it gets to the core. So you can step it down from the 12 volts all the way down to the 1.2 or whatever it is to the core cleanly. But if you've got ripple happening or the really unstable power coming down the power line because your power supply is maybe being pushed farther than it should be with high-end components, or it's just not a good power supply, and you have a daisy chain happening there, you're gonna have one really clean power plug and you're gonna have two power plugs that are gonna be sharing and potentially having ripple between them, which means you're putting extra duty on the power delivery system of your graphics card. Now, there are OCPs or overcurrent protections and stuff built into the graphics cards. There are also other safeguards in there to protect against things like ripple and power drop. Power droop is just as dangerous to a graphics card under load as is overcurrent. A card is only gonna be able to protect itself so many times. And I feel like when the users are saying, yeah, their computer shut down and then they turned it right back on and started playing again, I feel like the overcurrent protection or the ripple protection or whatever's built into the graphics card, depending on the vendor, hasn't had time to cool down, reset, or maybe even just, it may have been damaged the first time. I feel like that's what ended up popping their cards, is because we have a situation here where the game is being far too demanding on a graphics card, and then it is just damaging its power delivery here. Who's to blame for this? Because this is now going to be the news story. The news story is going to be who owns this problem. You have users in the wild now with $2,000+ graphics cards, whether you bought it for $1,500 or $3,000 or whatever. The problem is as valuable as the card costs today. We're talking $2,000 to $3,000 now per instance of these cards dying. So who is at fault? Is it the card manufacturer? Is it the power supply manufacturer? If it's gonna come to light that power supplies play a role. Is it Amazon? I believe this is one of those situations where it sucks for everyone involved, but it's a problem that may never have gone noticed that could potentially happen to something like the RTX 3090 until we had a specific use case scenario that checked just the right boxes to make this really weird problem happen. I believe Amazon owns a huge part of this, because of the fact that it was a problem that was already known to exist in alpha, should have never made it to beta. This is the automated QA engineering side of me talking. When I worked in software development and we did product testing, and I was our QA manager. My job was to identify these problems, identify the risks, and determine whether or not they go live in the next production release or get pushed back or production delay. This would have never made it to production or public, which is where we are now in beta, had I known about this ahead of time. And that's exactly where Amazon is. They knew about this ahead of time. This already existed. I see no reason whatsoever why the game's engine is uncapped. At the very least, apparently in the game as well, people are saying the FPS fluctuations are dramatic. I cannot understand why this engine is allowing itself to just run away. What we're seeing here essentially is the equivalent of a diesel overrun, where a diesel engine just runs away, where you can turn off the key, it doesn't matter. The cylinders are so hot, the glow plugs are so hot, it's still pulling in fuel. It will continue to just run over rev until it explodes, which is exactly what we're seeing here. Now, the analogy about who owns this problem can also be, for the car side of me, drilled down into this particular analogy. You've got an engine, you've got a performance engine, and it runs on gasoline or E85, ethanol, race fuel, whatever. So you've got an engine, you've got a gas pedal, which is the user. How much performance are you demanding of that engine? The user in this case being Amazon. And then you've got fuel, which is the power supply company, or the power supply. So you got fuel, engine, gas pedal. I feel like Amazon is just throwing its foot down on the gas pedal. There's no common sense there on when it should lift. But if you have a power supply, like I said, that's maybe subpar, or you're daisy chaining plugs like you shouldn't be, or you've got just a bad situation there happening, or too much power being demanded in your system overall to have a RTX 3090 that's, did you overclock it? Did you download Afterburner and increase the power limit? Did you do any of that? Because now you own a piece of the problem too. But that could be bad fuel. Now, engines have protections built in. They have knock sensors to, if the engine is starting to knock that or detonate where the fuel is pre-igniting, then it starts to pull back the timing so that it's not gonna start detonating, which could put holes and stuff in the piston. It's got other factors in there to say fuel pressure got too low. It goes into limp mode. All these things to protect itself. But if you continue to keep your foot on the floor and you turn off those protections and you've got bad fuel, the engine is going to suffer. And that's exactly what we experienced here with this RTX 3090. So at the end of the day, to protect yourself, if you end up wanting to actually play an MMO by Amazon, turn on VSync in your control panel. At least when you're playing that title. Turn it off when you want to play other titles. But just know, if you forget to turn it back on and you load New World, the second you hit play, you've just done the scenario which I've explained. We're gonna do more investigation on this. We're going to create a test bench with the parts that appear to be happening the most here. And then we're gonna see if we can't recreate the problem. I'm gonna look at things like power draw. I'm gonna try it with pigtails. I'm gonna try to create a situation where it doesn't blow up, and it does. But this video was more important to get out to explain to you guys what's happening, to keep it from happening to you. In the meantime, you can bet the tech community is gonna pick this up and talk about it. You can bet your butt Steve's gonna do a video trying to prove who's at fault for this. And then what I want from you guys, if you've experienced this yourself, and please, only if you've experienced this yourself, I don't care about your subjective opinion about what brand does what. Comment down below with what your CPU is, what your power supply is, what your graphics card is, and what your settings were. Resolution as well, because I feel like if you were running 4K, you may not get as much of a runaway. But all these things matter. Every little piece of this information allows you to zero in on the problem. Just saying, I have a 3090 and it blew up when I played this game doesn't tell anyone anything. Anyway, guys, hope this hasn't happened to you. If it did happen to you and you're in SoCal, reach out to me. I might want to physically borrow your card so that we can do a little investigation ourselves. So thanks for watching, guys, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.